So just to really drill it in, I'm going to start by walking you through that flow again. Um, so we have index HTML, which has a div with the ID of root to indicate that this is the starting point of our app where the root branches out from. Everything is going to go into here. This is the single page, the single HTML page for our app, SPA, single page app. And then we have the index.js, which mounts our app component into that root div. And the app component, when we use a component like an HTML element, it instantiates it or executes the function. It's just a function or a class that gets instantiated. So when this gets instantiated, it then renders, it then causes the return to happen. Right now, there's no logic in here, but there could be some extra logic up here that will run as well. But it's not needed right now because the app component is kind of simple. So then it returns the div and returns the quotes component. The quotes component, when it gets returned, it is executed and it is a function. It's an arrow function. The other one was a regular function. It doesn't really matter that much what kind of function the component is itself. It more matters what kind of functions you use inside the component. Actually, for functional, the component doesn't really matter because we're not dealing with this very much. But anyways, this component does have logic before the return, some code up here. So we initialize the state, and the state starts out as props.quotes. So our initial state are these initial quotes that are passed in. And when we initialize the state, this happens one time. The state is initialized. So I'll come back to that actually. We seed our state with a starting value of what the property is, which gets passed in. And that puts the starting value into the quotes variable. And then this set quotes is a function that we can use to update the quotes variable because we never want to mutate this state directly. We never want to change this state variable directly. We only change it through using the provided function for changing it so that React can handle and kick off the correct chain of events. And then this function is just declared, it's not executed yet. Then we return here this HTML or JSX as it's called. And when we return it, this map triggers a loop over that quotes state variable. And for each string, quote string, we return a div and a single quote, which triggers the single quote function to be executed. And the quote was passed in as a child here. So no properties are passed into this. So then this renders the Q element with some classes on it. The Q element has the classes, and then the child, which is the quote string, gets rendered. So that's the flow. And the one thing that I wanted to mention, which is some nuanced thing with the useState hook. So every time quote, so if the app re-renders, for example, say the app changes, and when I say app, I'm just talking about the app component. Say I have like a title or like an input box, okay? Input box or a title or something where you can type into the input box and it will update the title automatically. As you're typing, the title is changing that's displayed on the page, like the text inside an H element. Every character you type, it redraws that page. And when it redraws the page, it's triggering the functions to be executed again. But it's then redrawing it with the updated state. So when it gets triggered again, that means quotes here is triggered again. And that means all these quotes are being passed in again. And so then we come into here. So if this function is triggered again, then that means every line inside this function is being either executed, like this function's executed, or this is a function that's just being declared. It may not be executed right away. So if this is being executed again every time this function is executed, then how is it that our quotes don't keep resetting to the props.quotes? Because if this function runs again, it seems like we're passing it these quotes each time. So how does it, when we delete a quote, how does it avoid this from happening again? Yes, quotes is being updated, but what I'm getting at is if this function is executed again, this line of code is executed again. If this line of code is executed again, then it would seem like our quotes variable is going to be reset to the starting value rather than the current value.
If it gets redone again, being that you have const isn't going to create some sort of issue saying, hey, you've already declared this before.
That's a good question, but let's take a look at let's open up DevTools and test the theory. This is what you guys can do. Let's create a little arrow function here. We'll just call it fn. And then in here, we have some variable called x equals 5. And then we'll just like console.log x. So this is essentially the same thing. This is the const variable that you're talking about. So let me show you. Right? You said because this is const, which is a variable inside a function. So here's a function with a constant variable inside it. Wouldn't that mean if the function is called again, it's going to say, hey, that's a constant variable, it can't be set. But no, this is a distinction here. This is a constant variable that is created. It is declared every time the function is executed. When the function finishes running, the variable kind of like disappears and then it's recreated each time. So we're not trying to reassign x. We're not saying x is 5 and then later x is now something else. The variable is being completely recreated.
So
Same.
it's like with other variables and functions, they only function within that
Yes,
function.
exactly. So this is another reason that you can do something like this. For example, I less than 5, I plus plus. In here, I can say const x equals I, console.log x, and no problem. Because every iteration, it's creating a new constant variable that's called x. The next iteration, the old one is like no longer existing anymore. Now, if this const x was outside, I doesn't exist, so I can start it to 0. Well, now we run into a problem. We cannot reassign it. But when it's inside the loop, it's a brand new constant x variable each time. So there's no problem. But that doesn't mean I still can't say x equals I like plus 1. That breaks. So that's just some refresher on const. So there's nothing stopping this line of code from running again. It's not nested inside an if statement or anything like that. So I'm just trying to get you guys to think like just in like a really basic logical sense. It's like this is just a function. When a function's executed, the lines just run top to bottom. So how, if this is running again every time the function's executed, how is our state not being destroyed by being overwritten every time? Well, the only option is well, what the heck does this function actually do? We don't know the full implementation of it. So it must mean React is doing something special when this function is called, and it knows that it's already been initialized with a starting value before, so it does not re initialize it again if it's already been initialized once. So the first time the component is created, is instantiated, is mounted, is executed, this is initialized with a starting value. But the subsequent times it is executed, React has some like variable behind the scenes where it's like, has it been initialized once already? If it has, then ignore this value. We've already processed it. We don't need to use it again to change our quotes. So the quotes only gets assigned the initial value the very first time, and only that first time. Every other time this function runs, it knows not to overwrite quotes unless set quotes is executed, and then it will overwrite the quotes state variable. Does that make sense?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do things in an array like const? You know how it's const array quotes set quotes?
Oh, yes, here. So this is, we are not creating an array here.
Oh,
This is the array destructure syntax.
got it.
So this is shorthand for this. I will show you.
So it doesn't
Um,
put the values of those.
this is shorthand. So const quotes state equals use state props dot quotes. Okay. Const quotes. Let me comment this out. Equals use state 0 const set quotes equals use state 1.
It's like the older way of doing it.
Yes, this is like doing it manually.
Yeah.
So use state method is pass an initial value for the state we want to keep track of. Use state returns an array with 2 items. Index 0 is the current value of the state. So quotes is at index 0. Index 1 is the function used to update. So this is the function that I use to update this variable. All of this that I just wrote here, these 3 lines, this one line does the same thing.
Okay, it just looks like an array, so it doesn't actually protect the values. That's
Correct.
a little confusing, but
Yeah.
Cleaner.
Long form, yeah, it's confusing, but it's something that you're gonna you're gonna be seeing a lot of it in React. So we just have to, get more exposure to it and get used to it.
Yeah.
Of above use state line. So this is saying use state is returning an array. So the square brackets are saying, oh yeah, I'm getting back an array, but then the square brackets are saying, I want to take these 2 items out of the array, index 0, index 1, and give them a name, a variable name. And
structuring the temp array kind of thing.
Yeah, and both of these variables are going to be a constant. So this is basically, and these can be named whatever we want. This can just be named first item, and this can just be named second item. But they will always be the first item and the second item, no matter what you name them, just because of the order here.
Okay, because if it was a const array thing, the quotes and set quotes would be protected, right? Because
when you say protected, what do you mean?
You can adjust the values of things in an array, even if it's a const.
Correct.
So
it's only the array itself that you can't change. So const x equals array x dot push. Oops. How is x not defined?
Maybe semicolon. I don't know if it's done.
No, you don't need that.
I don't know.
Weird.
I get it.
Oh, my debugger's paused. What the heck is this?
My bad.
I don't know what's going on. Okay. Yeah, okay. So we can push into it. We can, the only thing we can't do is say x equals, something else, even though the something else is the same thing I started it with, but this is a new array. This is a different array. They're two separate instances of an array. And when you create array like this, by the way, what's actually happening is new array is being executed. It's instantiating it.
Okay.
Cool. No, Kristen, dot bind is not for protecting the values. What dot bind does is gives you manual control over what the value of this variable is set to. So for example, like if I don't know, can't think of a good example maybe, but function update favorite object, I guess. Key val, new val. Okay. This dot key equals new val. Okay. So if I just run this right now, I'm not even sure what's going to happen exactly. Let's see. Test new val. Window.test. I don't know where this even went. I think it if I returned, oh yeah, this was, well, what is the value of this? Let's console log it and see, because I'm not even sure. So if I run the function, okay, it's the window. This is the window. So what this should have done is add a key. That's what I was trying to do before. Didn't I type window.test? T. I think it's preventing me from adding a key to the window object because it's a special object. But so you see, this is the window object. Inside, if I just type this inside of a function, that's what this is. But I want this function to update my favorite object. So if I want to tell it what I want this to be, well, either I can change it and just say like provide me a favorite object and then change this to favorite object dot key equals new value, or I can create a new version of this function, say const update, or can I just say dot bind? Does dot bind return? I think it does. Update favorite object.
I think I was thinking of object freeze.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. This is still a good example though. Update favorite object dot bind person. Okay, this returns a new function. Can I change? I don't know if this is going to work. Let's see. Oops. It did work though. It added a key with the value Tom. It's just not what I wanted it to do. I just wrote it incorrectly. This should be this bracket key because key is actually the name of the key is stored into a variable. So now I said, okay, before this was the window. Now when I replaced this function, I said you are now equal to a new copy of this function where this value is bound to this person object. So now when I use this inside of the function, its value is equal to this person object here. So bind is a way to be able to manually control that. You can also, without .bind, creates a new copy of the function with this value permanently bound to that copy. But you can also use .call. .call is like a method to actually call the function for you. And you see the first thing it says is pass in a this argument, where you can say, okay, I want to call the function one time and have the value of the this keyword be, the person object, and then pass in the other arguments to this function that it needs. And then the next time I call it, say I want this value to be person2. So that's what .call is for. So .bind is like more permanent, if you want it to just stay the same. .call is if you want control over it, but it's like for one time it's some object and another time it's a different object. But don't worry too much about those things, because with functional components, we actually don't have to use them very much. And just in general, it's uncommon to have to manually change the value to control the value of this. It's not very common. It's more of a higher advanced thing that you'll do. Okay, so when do we need state? Who can remind me? When do we need to add state to a component?
Whenever it has something that will change from user input or whatever.
Exactly. Now, why do we have to add state to it if it has something that can change? Why can't we just create a variable and change that variable when we need it to change?
I think state just lets us know where it's at. In terms of state's just saying like the state of an element is like liquid, solid, gas.
Yeah.
So in computer programming, I think state is just letting us know like where it's at. So
yeah.
we access it properly or know.
But like a variable is already like set up for us to control the state,
Oh, true.
Right? Like let state of
maybe
what is state of water equals solid.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Now state of water is equal to liquid. Right. So if I have a variable inside my component, why can't I just use that variable to keep track of the state, change from solid to liquid? Or my favorite state, triple point. You know about that one?
No.
It's solid, liquid, and gas at the same time. That's the only way to drink water. Oh, you plebs there just drinking liquid water. Okay, so why can't I just use a variable like this?
Because of scoping?
Not exactly. So what happens to a variable inside of a function every time the function is called when you create a variable?
It will reset to whatever.
Yes, exactly.
All those.
Whatever I initialize that variable as in the function, it will always be reinitialized to that same value if I'm just using a regular variable. So since these functions are being called repeatedly whenever something happens, like when I delete a quote, it calls this function again in order to re-render the new quotes. But if I just use quotes as a regular variable and set it equal to props.quotes, it will then just keep being reset to props.quotes every time the function is called. Even if I delete something out of it, the very next time I try to delete, it gets reset again. The very next time I delete, it will get reset again to props.state, and then I'll only ever be able to delete one thing at a time, because after every delete, it's going to trigger the function to run again and reset its value to the full array. So I'll only ever be able to delete one at a time before it gets reset. So that's why we need to use, basically, this is like a special variable where the value of it is remembered between function calls. And we don't have a special variable like that built in. So we have to rely on useState method, which comes from React, and React then on a larger scope, zoomed out a little bit, outside of our function has some variables that keep track of the current state, and then we can then access those variables from within our function here. We can access this quote variable that is saved somewhere outside where its value is saved and doesn't get, interfered with.
So right now, quotes.js, you have this quotes variable that's in a state form or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
If you called the quotes variable in, say, app.js, it would render.
It doesn't exist.
Okay.
Doesn't exist. It exists somewhere, but I don't have access to it. React is storing it somewhere, but I can't access it. If I write the same exact line in a different component, it will be its own separate state variable with the same name inside of this function. It has the same name, but outside the function in the React ecosystem, it's saving it separately. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
It looks like state. You know how like state for the elements is like gas, water. In computer programming, what would state look like?
Oh, well, it's just whatever the value is. Like it's just like
for
like here, this this variable has a state, and its state is this string.
Yep.
But here the state is this other string, and the way strings are stored is in bits or whatever. So the state is just like that.
Just like normal practice of what people use for state, like pending, processed, or something, or like on off or true false.
Well, yeah, but true and false are not sufficient to represent like a string of characters. It's just true or false. True or false is something that you keep track of state. Like let light switch state equal true. The light switch is on. Right. Light switch state equal false. The light switch is off. Boolean is sufficient for keeping track of that, but it's not sufficient for keeping track of.
It just depends on of the state of. Okay.
Yeah. And there's in programming, like every time you guys get to a street light, you should be thinking about state, and they're using some programming there to make sure that the state of the street lights will never conflict with each other. It can never be green in both directions at the same time. They programmed that in. It's called like what is it called? A state machine or something like that. This is like if you want to research it, lower level stuff. Finite state machine, stuff like this is hard to read. I can't even really read it very well, but they're using some sort of state principles to make sure that the whole intersection can only ever have certain sets of states where only this side can be green at a time, or you can only have you only have a certain set of configurations to choose from, and it's not possible for it unless like the actual circuitry malfunctions for it to get messed up. So okay. So let's start building some stuff here. we did a lot yesterday, so we had time to kind of review this stuff. So now I want to add a form that will let me add a new quote into this array. So I can delete quotes, but now I want to be able to add quotes. So so when I add a form, what am I going to need in the form for being able to add a quote?
A label and an input.
Yeah. I'm going to need a label and an input. And so then what do I need to keep track of in the form?
The value of the input.
Yes. So I need a state. I need a separate piece of state to keep track of that value. So we just create another piece of state. So new quote, or let's do like submitted. How about let's add some more let's add some more stuff to our quote. Instead of our quote just being a quote, let's say it's submitted by somebody, or like author as well. Let's just say instead of submitted by, let's just make it author. Who's the author of the quote? So in our form, we're going to take in a quote and we're going to take in an author's name. Author, set author. This is just the pattern. Blank, set blank is how it's named. So what's the default value going to be? The starting value, I mean, the initial value in the form of this input box that this is going to correspond to.
Blank.
Blank. So what blank value should I use? Null?
Empty string.
Empty string. Yeah, empty string's good because input boxes are strings, the values. So then I'm going to have another input box. So I'm going to create another state variable, and this one will be for the actual new quote. New quote. So now we have state to keep track of two input boxes, values, I think. Okay, so now I can create my form. And what is the special, well, there's on submit, right? On submit, I'm going to get an event, and then I want to call a function to handle the submission, the form submission. So handle submit, and here I'm going to pass the event. Why is this messed up? Oh, I need some curly braces around here, right? Yeah, handle submit doesn't exist yet though, which is fine. I'll define it in a second. What's the first thing that we want to do in when a form is submitted every time in React?
Prevent default.
Why do we
Validate
do
the
that?
form?
We do this first every time.
Hmm.
Well, it doesn't have to be first, but it has to be in the function, I think. So why do we do this?
Because form usually has that action, which takes it to a URL path, which would re-render the page.
Yes. Prevent the default behavior of a form redirecting, causing a page refresh due to an HTTP request, right? If it's not if you don't specify the form as a post, it's going to be a GET request. So it'll try to do a GET request, and we don't want the page to have to reload in React. So we prevent that behavior. Okay. So now in here, I'll create a div with a label in it, and then this label, I'll put an input inside of it, and we'll do a second one like that. Type is text. And now what do I write? What am I going to add to the labels to make it so that we can update the state? Whenever you type into the labels, we can update the state that the label the input, we can update the state that the input corresponds to.
A event listener.
What is it called? Yeah.
On change.
On change. Yep. And what are we going to do on change?
Run a function.
We're going to be passed a callback function that gets. I mean, we're not going to be passed. We are going to. On change is going to execute a function, so we're going to give it a callback function, and then what are we going to use? What are we going to do in this callback function for each of these? What do we want to do? How do we tell the state to update for this
Want to
particular.
do set author or set new quote.
Exactly. And then what am I setting it to?
Event.target.value.
Yes. What is the target?
The input element that is being changed.
Yes, exactly. So then this one will be set quote, set new quote. The target of the event is the HTML element where the event originated from. So on change, it's the input box that's being changed. On click, it's the button that's being clicked, or if it's a div that's clicked or an image that's clicked. Yeah. Okay. So we should now be keeping track of these input boxes. By the way, maybe you haven't seen this structure before where you put the input inside the label. That automatically makes it so that if I click on author, it will put my cursor into the input box. The alternative way of doing that is if the input is outside, you can do a for attribute on the label, which is set equal to an ID that is on the input, but that requires creating 2 attributes. So in Bootstrap, though, they do not have the inputs nested in the label because then it causes some styling. It's harder to style them separately. But for here, I'm just going to do it. Okay, so then we also need a submit button. Button, by default, they are type submit. So I don't need to write that type submit on the button. And so now let's just see if anything, this space is not there. Why is that space not there? It shouldn't be here. It should be here. It's stripping it. Okay. So I can type in and nothing's breaking. That's a good sign. So now when I submit, what do I want to do when I submit? How do I get the information from the how do I get the information from the form? How do I get that information?
It's in your state variable.
Yeah, we already got it. That's why we did all that. Okay, so now my quote, it has some information associated with it, right? My quote has an author associated with it. So how am I going to group these 2 pieces of information together?
You could do a object with the key author and key new quote.
So let's create an object called new quote, and we'll have a key called author. If I just do it like this is shorthand. Shorthand. Key name matches var name. That is used for the value.
Doing
So-
that hoist, right?
What's that?
Will that hoist?
No, because author's already above.
Oh, I see. It.
So that's where it's available, and you can, yeah. But for this next key, I'm not gonna be able to do the shorthand because I don't want the key to be called new quote. So here's where using the object gets a little bit kind of weird, because if I call these objects quotes, then what do I call the actual quote text itself? Because I don't really want to do, quote dot quote, quote dot text, quote dot.
Change the object name, or can you?
Yeah, I can, but like when I'm doing a loop, for example, when I'm looping through all these quotes, to display them. I kind of want to call it like for each quote, you know.
Can't you do like quote text, and that way you still have quote and text in there?
Yeah, quote
A phrase.
text. I could just say I could just call it text, author text. I mean, yeah.
Or
Let's just do that.
content.
Content, yeah, that's good. Content, text, body, but the body of the quote, I don't know. That one isn't as good. I like body in a lot of cases. We'll just call it text for now. So the text will be the new quote. Why is that?
So you're
An issue because your
shoot, yeah, I named this the same. How about we just call this submitted quote instead?
could you just call that text and then you can shorthand it?
This I don't want to call. Oh, yeah, I could. Quote text. Yeah, maybe I just call this one quote text. I don't want to shorthand this one actually, because I want you guys to see shorthand and longhand side by side. Longhand must be used when key and value, and I'll just say longhand. I think you'll get it. Okay. So down here, I have to change set quote text. Oh, that's not right. Set quote text. Change this. Okay. So let's first just console log this and see if we're getting the values that we expect to be getting. So on submit, this new quote object should be logged. Why is this happening? Why do I have this deactivate? Okay.
Do you guys ever have like a lesson on using the console?
No, but I will like go over that, you know, when we get into some more like bugs that we but it works the same as debugging in here. Like it's just breakpoints, same thing. The only difference is the file pane is not available. Let's check this real quick and then I'll show you what I'm talking about. Okay. Don't worry about this. This is from my LastPass extension. So we have this object, author text. There we go. Pretty cool. Sources is where you get the files. So in here, I can go here, and then I can set a breakpoint if I want this to pause. So next time I submit, oh, it doesn't work. Why not? Well, that's unfortunate. Handle submit, it definitely is running. So it's not pausing, probably because of React, but I've done this before. Quotes, oh, we're in quotes, aren't we? We're in quotes, yeah. Maybe let's refresh the page. I don't know, there's something weird going on with, this is React Dev Tools. It doesn't show that I have any other breakpoints, so I don't know why that one is breaking.
I think you have to go to the event listeners breakpoint, yeah, and then go and click, I think, or something.
They're all unchecked.
I pulled up a video. It looks like they're checking one of those boxes.
Oh, really?
To debug properly with React.
With React?
React.
Only one of these boxes?
Yeah, I'm trying. I mean, I just pulled it up, so here.
Yeah.
Because the purpose of this would be debugging in Chrome using React.
Yeah.
Okay.
Console.
Oh, it looks like he's using an on-click event handler, so that's why he's selecting that event listener click specifically. But it depends which
There's a click in here.
Well, he has an on-click event in
Yeah.
his code. So
Well,
pause, I think, or what we're trying to.
Usually you don't have to. A lot of times you don't have to do this because there's also this extension called components. I mean, the extension is React Dev Tools, and here you can a lot of times get the information you're wanting, which most of the time your problem is what is the current value of the state, and this will show you. So the current value of the state is what's typed into the input box.
So components includes the breakpoint.
No, it doesn't include the breakpoints though.
I can figure that out. I mean,
Yeah, there's trying to remember. I set a breakpoint before. Is this index? Where's? Okay, yeah, I think you have to maybe do it from this one. Let's see. No? Okay, I don't know. It changed. Even this icon, this red circle used to be different. I'll look into that, see how to do that. But if once you get the breakpoint to stop, everything else is the same as in VS Code. You get the little thing where you can say go to the next line, go to the next line. You get the same windows of that I showed you before, like to watch variables and stuff like that. But okay, so we saw this console log was working. So now, what do we want to do with the this quote object?
We want to add it to the end of the quotes variable so it displays on the page.
To the quotes variable, yes. So we have to restructure things a little bit though, because right now these quotes are just strings, and now our quote is going to be an object which has an author in it and a text key. So if I just add it to here, we're going to now be mixing strings and objects. So I'm going to restructure my data to be objects. So coming back to here, let's turn each of these into a object that has those key value pairs. No, text, author, right? Okay. And the commas are now in the wrong places. Shoot. Okay. So now quotes is an array of objects that match this format. Sound good? Any questions with that?
Looks good.
So it's breaking now, but that's fine. It's because I'm trying to, it's telling me I'm trying to render this whole object now rather than it just being a string instead. So we'll fix that in a second. Let's first add this new quote to my quotes state here. This is the array of those quote objects. So what am I going to write to add this into the state?
You're going to call the function set quotes to update its state.
Okay. Am I going to call it like I did over here, filter, using filter or something?
No, because you need the original quotes as well.
What do I need to pass in to set quotes? So how about this? Will this, could I do this?
No, because that'll return a number.
Well, and then just go like this.
Doesn't dot push return a number?
Yeah, it returns a number, but I'm not storing that return value anywhere. I still have my quotes variable. Quotes is still the array. I'm not saying quotes equals the returned value of dot push, which is just an integer. So what's going on here? Will this, do you think this will work? Do you think it won't work? Is it breaking any rule? This is called mute.
In line 40, you're only supposed to adjust your quotes variable using the set quotes.
Exactly.
Function.
This is mutating state directly, mutating as in changing it directly, and it bypasses the proper way to update it. So, and then also remember in the setter, you have to pass a brand new object or brand new array. Otherwise it doesn't update. So this will not update. It will not cause the component to re-render. So we need to pass in a brand new array to set quotes. So I could make this work if I do dot slice here, and if you don't provide any arguments, it will just copy the whole array. But I'm still, before I slice it, I'm still mutating it directly, which is not, technically this will work without any problems from what I've seen, but technically you should not mutate it directly because it can cause an unintended side effect. So instead, I could also do this. I could say, make a copy of it, const quotes equals quotes copy, and then say quotes copy dot push new quote. And now quotes copy is a brand new array that has all the old ones in it and the new one pushed. This is totally valid. It's just not the common way of writing it in React because it's a little bit cleaner to, let's say, must pass a brand new array to set quotes for it to update.
The dot slice method passes a shallow
copy. That means it breaks the reference of the original array so that they're two separate arrays. But if it's an array of objects, then the objects inside are still the same objects by reference. They're not also copies of the objects. It's a deep copy if the reference is broken at every level, which is a lot more expensive to do because you have to like recursively drill down if there's, there could be objects nested in objects nested in objects inside the array, and you'd have to like drill down and it would have to copy all of them.
Okay.
But shallow copy is sufficient.
Okay.
Cool. Would you use spread instead?
Yes. There's no like, the only benefit of using spread is that you can just write it nice, pretty clean on one line like this. So readability wise, it's like set quotes, new array, all my quotes, comma, and then the new quote. So instead of, this is still readable, but you have to read 3 lines. You're like quotes copy equals quotes dot slice. Okay, got it. And then push it. Okay, and then set it. Okay. But this, it kind of just when you get used to spread, it's just really easy to read. But it does the same. It's basically doing the same thing. This is like, you know, putting all the other quotes in here and then adding the one at the back. So this one right here is kind of like push. But the advantage of spread is I'm not limited to putting it at the back. I can put it in the front if I wanted to. I could go like this. Now all new quotes are added to the top of the list. So spread is a little bit, I mean, I could with slice instead of pushing, I could do shift or unshift to add to the front. No, it's not unique to React. It's part of JavaScript. Create a brand new array. Spread all the existing quotes into it, plus the new quote at the end. Okay. Yeah. Passed into set quotes. Okay. So this is how we're going to be writing it most of the time when we're dealing with an array, or this is how I'm going to be writing it most of the time. Okay, so now we're almost ready to test it, but it's still going to break because our quote, the way it's being displayed, this is no longer a string. It's an object. Remember, it's a quote object that has a quote text and it has an author. So this is a quote object. And I don't want to pass it as a child anymore, because since now it's an object, it's kind of weird to pass it as a child, because now I'm going to have to do, well, it's not that weird, but I'm not expecting to have multiple children. So passing it as a child is kind of starting to get weird. So I would just rather pass it as a property. So instead of this, I will just pass it in as a property now. Let's see, I don't need the closing tag anymore. Because I'm going to have no children anymore. And so now I'll just pass it as a property. We'll just call it the quote, and its value will be this quote object. So now my single quote needs to be updated to be able to display this quote properly. It's going to have a props.quote. And so what am I going to type here to display the text of the quote that's passed in?
Props.quotes.text.
Quote singular, because quote singular here. But yes, because this is a single quote. So now that's where I display the text. And so I can now display the author right after it. I'll just put a dash, and we will use a span so that it stays in line side by side, and then display the author here. So how am I going to display the author? What do I type?
Props.quote.author.
Yep.
It might help if I'm unmuted.
Okay. Is there a space there? There should be a space here. Why is the color all messed up? Oh, okay. Are these two adjacent elements? Is that why? Let's see. Expected. It's right here. And I think these are two adjacent elements, and it doesn't like that.
Well, so what it looks like to me is you have your open bracket, close bracket, open bracket, close, open, close, and then you have one extra closed under the yellow one looks closed and doesn't like that.
The yellow one is part of is for the closing of the component. Yeah, I think these are just it's not telling me the proper, it's not giving me the proper error message, but when you format it like this, these are two adjacent elements. So I think that if I wrap in a div, there we go. So that fixes it. Okay. So we now display the Q element with the quote text in it, and then the span with the author. So now I think we're ready to finally test it. Okay, here we go. Authors are being displayed next to the text. Delete still works, that hasn't been changed. Let's try submit. What was, you guys got a good quote? How about this? Author, student, quote, I swear I wrote it exactly like you did. Nice, it works. All right, let's wrap it up a little bit. So let's see here. How about we clear these input boxes? How do I clear the input boxes after the submission?
After you submit, so after you've, yep, there. So after you do that, then you set the value of that input equal to blank.
And how do I set the value of the input?
Hang on just one sec. I have it here. You set
yeah, whatever my set stuff is called. So
yeah,
set author,
set blank, parentheses, quote,
yep,
quote, yep, that exact thing.
Set quote text as well. Okay. So is this going to change the input box, or is it only going to change the state variable?
That should change the state variable, and then you
why would it change the input box though?
Then you go down to the input box and you set the value equal to that.
Exactly. So this will reset the state variables, but my input boxes, the way they're working currently is if you type into them, it updates the state variable. But if you update the state variable, it does not automatically update the input box. So it's called one-way binding. And now we're going to, it only goes one way. But now if we tell this input box, we say, your value is now going to be tied more directly to the author state variable. That means if I update the author state variable, then it will force the value in the input box to update as well. And then quote text as well. Okay, so there we go. That worked. Awesome. Okay. Questions with this? Okay. Let me show you let's see, is this where the map is happening? Yeah, map. Let me show you what the map is doing to remind you. Manually map to single quote. Okay, so if I want to manually do what this map is doing. In order to do that, so you can better understand map, equals an arrow function. I'm going to, what does map do? What does it return? What does map return?
A new array that loops through the thing that you want it to.
New
Or
array.
the array that you want it to.
It creates a new array based off of the array you're looping through, right?
Yeah.
It replace with all, yeah, whatever the new array contains the items that your map callback function returns. So here I can do it manually, do a for loop through quotes.length, and then new array dot push. I think I'm gonna need parentheses here as well. Let's see. I'm gonna, I wish I called it, I'm gonna call it IDX here, just because that's how I called it down there. Okay. And then I need to push in this HTML into my array. And this is technically not HTML, but JSX. That's why I can push it into an array. Okay, I don't have a quote object anymore because I'm doing this by index. Or I could make a quote object. Let's just say quote object equals.
Sorry, real quick. Is JSX is
JSX,
that
yeah.
very, very similar to EJS?
No, EJS is like the server side. EJS is Jinja, but for JavaScript. We don't need that template rendering engine because that's for server-side rendering. If you were going to do server-side rendering, then you could use EJS.
Okay.
So here we're just indexing it. And now I need to return my new array. But you see how this is not flexible. This only works for this one case. In another component, if I'm looping over some other array with I want to return some other HTML, like I'm going to have to rewrite this same for loop and new array every time. So the dot map is so that I don't have to rewrite that every time. I just write only what I want to be returned. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is instead of dot map, I will comment this out. And just execute manually map to single quotes. And this will just create this new array and for each item push in that same HTML. So let's see if it worked. And it works. So what happens, this makes it more clear, when I press delete, it updates my quotes. And then because the state updates, it causes the component to rerun. And when the component reruns and the return triggers, we get to here, which reruns this function, which recreates this array. But when it recreates the array, that one item that was deleted is gone. So it's missing then, that one item. And so it renders this new array with different items in it. Does that make sense? Does that help you guys understand map a little bit better? No? Nobody? Doesn't help anyone?
Oh, I do have a quick question. So you did say it could be used in that one case. Is it
Yes.
better than dot map in this case? Okay.
It's the same performance, but the thing is, if I wanted to then also, say I wanted to loop over the quotes again and just display a list of the authors only, I would have to I'd have to write another function to do that. Inside that function, I'd have to write a new array. I'd have to write a for loop, and then I'd have to, create the thing that I want to access out of that array, and then I have to push again into the new array and then return a new array just to do the same thing, basically, but slightly differently. That's what .map is for. We can just keep using .map anytime we want to do the same thing, but slightly differently. Okay, cool. So I want you guys to remember that, though. That's all that .map is doing. That's it. The only difference is it's flexible because it accepts a callback function. So I could change this to accept a callback function, and then it'll be more flexible. But then at that point, I'm just literally redefining the .map like we already did. Oh gosh, that opened on the main screen. I'm scared of don't know what you guys are linking. But it looked like a legit joke. Okay. One last thing, I think. Yeah. Let's add a way to like click on a quote and select it, and just add a style to the quote if you clicked it. So how am I going to keep track of which quote is selected?
With this?
No, not with this.
Can't you do something like you did with your delete button where it registers the selection?
In what way will it, how will we, so sure, if I know what index is selected, but
now what are you wanting to do when you select the quote?
Like style it, add like a border around it or something. So that means while I'm looping here, I need to know which quote is selected so that
then,
I can style.
By the index number, right?
Okay, so then where am I going to store the selected quotes index?
Into a class name or ID.
Well, how do I keep track of the selected quotes index?
Do you use another state?
Yes, if I want to go that approach. Or it's the quote itself that's selected, so it's some attribute of the quote itself, right? Do you see what I'm saying? Wouldn't it make sense to, down here, say, so I can create a variable like let classes equal this, and then say like if quote object dot is selected, then classes equals selected. Like make a selected class, or we can do plus equals in case we wanted to make this plus equals selected, but with a space at the end to leave room for if we wanted to write more logic that will what's it called? Be able to add more classes. So then class name here equals classes. I don't have a selected class right now, but we can just make one real quick. app.css dot selected border 1px solid. What are we working? What colors we got here? Got some cornflower blue. It's a good one. Okay. So doesn't this kind of make little more sense than being like having it separate from the quote, a separate variable that says which quote is selected. Because what if I wanted to allow the ability to select multiple quotes? Now you have to store an array of all the indexes of the quotes that are selected. Or in this case, just doesn't matter. Any quote that the dot is selected attribute of it is true is considered to be selected. So now I need to add an onClick here so I can select the quote. OnClick equals, we got an event callback function, and let's just run the select quote function, which doesn't exist yet. And here, what does my select quote function, what will it what do I need to know here? If I want to add the is selected to true on the quote that's selected here, what should I pass into this function? Come on, what should I pass into this function?
Target.
The target, what is the target going to be? Remember what is the target always?
Where's it going?
Where's what going? What do you mean? Is that was that an answer or was that a question?
Target is always the thing that initiated the event.
Mm-hmm. So in this case, the event is a click and the target is the thing that was clicked. So the target's a div. So I don't really care about the div. I want to know which quote is in the div. How do I know which quote was clicked on when this div is clicked?
By the ID turn or the selection being quote unquote selected.
Well, I don't know yet. I don't know yet if this quote was selected. This is like say this quote is not selected, then that means its class is an empty line. But somebody does click on this div. Now I need to get the quote that they clicked on and say is selected is equal to true on that particular quote. So that's what my select quote function needs to know. It needs to know which quote so I can change the is selected to true.
The index from the key.
Okay, yeah. I have access to the index, and it's not from the key, it's from here. It's from the map. That's where all these indexes are coming from. And I'm inside the dot map, so I have access to it. I'm in the same scope. So yeah, I can pass the index, but I'm going to use the index to get the object. So I might as well just pass in the object, which I have right here as well. So if I pass in I could pass in the index as well. Maybe there's a reason I'd want to know the index, but for now, all I need is the object. And then with the object, I can change it.
Or is that a instantiation of the object?
Sorry, what's that?
That's just one single instantiation of the object?
Yeah, because remember, .map, what it's doing, it's just looping over each object, getting the object, and then, so it's just whichever object we're currently on in this loop here.
Okay.
But what happens is the loop finishes and renders everything to the page, and so the loop is like not happening anymore. But all this information is like remembered in the that's how like functions work. It's like even though the function is over, the information can be like retrieved based on the I think the technical term is execution context or something like that. There's a context like stored in memory. It's like when this function executed, this was the context. These things had these values, so that if you try to retrieve some information after the fact, that context can be accessed. You know, what was the context of things? at that time. So it's like when this div is clicked, it's like in the execution context, currently the index has a certain value, and currently the quote object is the quote object that pertains to that index. And so even though the loop will be over by the time we actually click on anything, the information can be still retrieved. So up here, I will create this function now, and we said I'm going to receive a quote object, and all I want to do with it is just say quote dot. I mean, do I really need? Oh, you know what? Let's see if this works. This is quote dot is selected equals true. Technically, this might be kind of a bad practice because this quote is inside of this state. So technically, we are trying to update the state. So we should recreate the state here. But let's just see what happens. Okay. The click is, I don't know if the click is working. So let's put a console log. Where? Selected quote, log, select quote. Booleans are lowercase in JSX. This is JavaScript here. JSX is when we're writing like the HTML inside. When we're writing the HTML. The HTML is specifically the JSX. Okay, so this is the last thing, and then we'll be done. It is select quote. So this should be executing. I'm expecting to see. God dang it! Stop this. Okay, I'm expecting to see that console log. Yes, so it is console logging, but what's happening is this the div? I think it's, yeah, this div is the one I'm adding the class to, but it's an empty string, so it's nothing. For all of these, it is an empty string. So the quote object, though, is being updated, but it's not triggering the component to re-render. And so since it doesn't re-render, the class never changes from empty string to selected. And that's because we mutated the state directly, even though it's a nested piece of state. So what we need to do is we need to trigger it to re-render. So what I should do here is I should first copy this object, const quote copy. And so we can use spread to do that as well. We just use the curly brackets when it's an object instead of square brackets. So copy the quote so that when I update it, I'm not mutating a piece of state directly. And then set quotes. Yeah, here's where I need the index because I need to replace this quote now with the index. So let's just change to passing in the index instead. Quote copy is selected as true. And then I can say, there's much more like succinct ways of doing this, but I don't want it to get too confusing. So now I will make a copy of quotes. So that I don't mutate that. Jesus, why can't I type this word? And now once I've copied quotes, I can now mutate it. Okay. Updated quote. Maybe I should change this to updated quote. Maybe it'll be a little easier to read. Copy the quote using spread so that we don't mutate state directly. Okay. And then same thing here. Copy the quotes with spread so we don't mutate state. And now I'm ready to set quotes with this copy, where I've updated the object and updated the, I've only updated the object, but I need to pass in a brand new array, remember. So this could all be written as like one line, but it'll get like really confusing. Basically, the way you would write it, I think in the Learn platform, it shows a snippet of it, is you'd use spread, and inside the spread, you'd say slice from, slice from the start to the index, but exclude that index, and then replace at that position the object with this new object, and then slice the rest of the stuff that comes after that object. And it just does not look pretty and is pretty confusing. Okay, so let's now check if this works. Geez, none of this used to happen last time I taught. Why won't it just deactivate? Uh-oh, still not working. Let's see. What am I looking for? Quotes. Not individual quote. I want to look at quotes. Okay, so none of these have the key on it, and I took that console log off. So let's just take a look at what we're dealing with here. Let's log quotes copy. Jesus. Okay. Oh, why does this one print object? Uh-oh. So that definitely does not look good, does it? Oh, okay. I know what happened here. This is funny. So remember I changed, I said I want to change to be receiving the index. But I didn't actually change, I was still passing in the object. So the object was passed in, I called the parameter, I changed the parameter name to index, but I still pass in the object. So this is what happened. So down here, where is select quote? I need to pass in, wait, why is it? Yeah, I need to pass in the index here. Okay. There we go. Looks messed up though, because we have these horizontal rules. So does not look pretty. Maybe we should do a background color instead. Okay, a little better. Okay, so let's just review that real quick. So the first time we come around, is selected actually doesn't even exist in the object. You know why? Because in app, we don't have an isSelected key being provided. So what is the value of isSelected initially? If it doesn't exist, what does that mean the value is when you try to access it in JavaScript? X is an empty object, x dot name, x dot age. Any key that doesn't exist is undefined. And so what happens is it's undefined initially. So then when we say if quote dot is selected, we're saying if undefined. Undefined is not true, so this does not happen, which means classes is an empty string, which means all our classes are empty to start with. And then when we click on an object, we click on the div, select quote, pass the index in, we copy our quote so that we don't alter it directly. And then we edit it after we've copied it. And then we copy our quotes object. And then we change an index on it. So we copy it before we edit it. And then we set it with that updated copy. And then that triggers the component to rerun. So it now has one of our quotes on the first click has now been selected. So we come down here and the return happens again, which means the map happens again. And so for all of our quotes, it's undefined except for one of them. It exists and its value is true. So then this happens for only one of them. And then that class is added on.
So everything we type in that document, the way it's read by the computer is it reads the JavaScript and then the React is constantly being rerun? Or
well, when you say the React is being rerun, what do you mean?
Or sorry, I meant all like
it's just a function. So just like a function, it just when it's executed, it goes top down.
Okay.
So, but the thing that's different is this function is automatically re-executed if any of the pieces of state change, and that's where React helps us. Is we're not keeping track. I mean, we're telling the state when to update, but React decides when to re-render the component so that the new state is displayed on the page. Okay. So remember in the vanilla components lecture when the paragraph text would not update with the new count. I had to manually tell it to update whenever we click it. I had to write the code, say, okay, change the inner text of the paragraph element. That's because it doesn't automatically update just because I was inserting a variable into the paragraph, the count. I was inserting that variable into the paragraph. Just because I put it in there, it doesn't mean it's going to automatically update. I had to do that manually. But here, React is like, because we have these pieces of state and because you are trying to display them in the HTML, we know that if any of them update, we need to re-render the HTML. And in order to re-render the HTML, the HTML is in the return. For the return to happen, the function needs to be executed. So the function React re-executes the function whenever it needs to redisplay the stuff on the page. Does that answer?
Yeah. So basically, whenever the useState thing changes, then it knows.
Yeah. Whenever you run the set, it knows that it's going to need to re-render. It may not re-render immediately though. Like if you have like a lot of different sets, if you run like 3 different sets in a row, or like for example, right here, these two, it probably doesn't re-render and then re-render again. It probably, these two come in so fast that it batches them together, updates them together, and then does one re-render only to save performance.
Okay. Wow. Wow.
Yeah. So let's see, one final thing. What if I want to click it and unselect it? How can we do that very easily?
Like adding like a delete button kind of thing? Or what do you mean by unselected?
As in like make the background color go away if I click it again. What is that type of functionality called? You click it once, it does something, you click it again, and then it undoes it. What do we call that type of functionality?
I don't remember what it's called, but is there basically what you can do is like have I saw this in one of the things we were doing where we hover and it would turn all the background red, and then when you stopped hovering it would register and then send it back to the default of white. So
toggle.
Yes.
Toggle just means like on and off or something, but it means like it's the same thing. It's like it's like a light switch. Instead of a light switch that's up and down, it's a light switch that's just a button. And when you press it, if it's off, it turns on. If it's on, it turns off. It just does the opposite. So instead of making it select quote, we make it toggle. So we don't want to have to write a select quote and a deselect quote, because all of it will be the same except one different thing, which is just make it opposite. So here I need to say updated quote that is selected is equal to what? It's not only going to be true because now it needs to be false if it was true before.
The state is going to switch between on and off, or true and false.
Mm-hmm.
So it's what did we do the state thing? Use state?
Not state, because this is a piece of, so this is where it gets a little confusing. Is selected, you can call it a piece of state of the quote. It is a piece of state that describes some state of the quote. Mm-hmm. But we did not formally create a React state hook for it, because React is keeping track of all my quotes here. So if I update a quote directly, I don't really need React to know about all of those things. I just need it to know that one quote has updated, which means my quotes array has updated. So that's all it needs to know about. So this is a piece of state here, but all I need to do is say is selected is equal to the opposite of what it currently is, which means if it's undefined, then the opposite of undefined is what?
Defined. I don't know.
It's true, because the opposite of something that's kind of false or falsy, the opposite of falsy things is true. The opposite of anything that's like empty or nothing, right? Not null is true, not zero is true, not empty string is true. So the first time we click it, it's undefined. So not undefined is true. So it'll change to true. The second time we click it, it's true, and not true means it'll be false. So this should toggle it now with that one small change. So you see how much of a waste it would have been to create two separate functions, select and deselect. Pretty cool, huh? And you could have written all this stuff in jQuery or vanilla JavaScript. It seems like it would have been maybe easier right now, but only because you're not used to React yet. Once you get used to it, then it'll start being a lot faster and easier to do it in React, because it does a lot of the stuff for you, the headache stuff. Like if you don't, if I did this in jQuery, I'd have to say this element was on click. I'd have to say select the element and then add a class to it, or remove a class from the class list, from the list of classes. I'd have to do that. But then I'd have to write separate functionality for it'll just end up being a lot more manually rewriting stuff. And then especially when you start getting into some more complex stuff with React, like building an actual application, you really need the structure that React kind of enforces. It's like if you want to benefit from the way React works, you have to follow its rules. And so when you're working on a team, if you're doing everything with vanilla JavaScript and you're trying to build like a dynamic application where stuff changes when you click it, it's just like the wild, wild west. Everyone's just everyone's just selecting document.getElement by ID everywhere, all over the place. And you don't know what the hell is going on because it's not following a formal structure. That's the other advantage of a framework is it imposes a formal structure. So when you work in a team, you know if you go to some other component somebody else wrote, they're using the state in the same way. Maybe they don't write the variables the way that you like it, but the way that they use state is the same. They call the same useState function, and it has the same behaviors. You can make assumptions about how things are going to work because you're working in the same type of framework. Any other questions before we end? Yeah, you know, Stephen, that Facebook invented React, right? As a necessity. They were building like Facebook. Yeah, they were building Facebook, and it was like hard, obviously. And so they as a team were like I don't know all the details, but
it was just Mark Zuckerberg. He did everything. I watched that movie.
He did it all while also learning how to speak Mandarin at the same time. But yeah, basically it probably started with a couple people working together, and they're like, this is a pain. We got to like formalize like a way of working, of doing all this stuff. And so they just slowly built a formal structure on how to do things. And then it became like the de facto like procedure. And then they packaged it and put it up on the internet for anybody else to be able to use it. Now, there was already Angular before React came out, so they could have been using Angular framework, which solves all the same problems pretty much. But I don't know why they didn't use it. I mean, probably because Angular was created by Google, and they're like, we're Facebook. We don't want to have to use everything Google. Even though I'm sure they're using like a lot of Google stuff, probably like Gmail or whatever. But you don't want to, as a company, be dependent on another company for every single thing, even though Angular is like, it's free and open source and stuff, so you're not fully dependent. But maybe they tried it and were annoyed at some features of it, so then they're just like, we'll just build our own version. So if you use Angular, it works on the same component principle. It works on the state principle as well, so it's all very similar. So any other questions? Anything you want me to clarify here? Oh, shoot. Okay, that's it then. See you guys.